Naomi Wolf is an international best-selling author whose work has examined politics, female empowerment, women's sexual liberation, childbirth, and the exploitation of women by fashion and beauty industries. She received her Bachelor of Arts at Yale University and later attended New College, Oxford as a Rhodes Scholar. Her first book, The Beauty Myth, examined 5 areas in which Naomi believed women were under assault: work, religion, sex, violence, and hunger. It quickly became a bestseller and garnered praise from the feminist movement as well as from the public and mainstream media. Today, for the first time in history, Naomi believes the power and allure of erotic images have supplanted that of real naked women, while at the same time internet pornography has lowered women's sense of their own sexual value. Naomi is also known for her advocacy of progressive politics, and her latest book, The End of America, A Letter of Warning to a Young Patriot, speaks to the cause of every American, the preservation of the Constitution and the liberties it embodies and protects. More important than all of this, Naomi recently appeared on the Comedy Channel's The Colbert Report, which makes her, at least for me and probably some of you, instantly and undeniably the coolest person on the planet, Naomi Wolf.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. It's an honor to be here, and I can't wait to tell my 12-year-old daughter that I am officially the coolest person on the earth. She will not buy it, but I have it on good authority now. It's so inspiring to be here. Sometimes you just get tired and depressed, the way I was when I sort of woke up in the middle of the night and thought, these forces are too big, the planet is warming, the Constitution is crumbling, it's over. And then you come to an event like this, and, well, specifically, I had the pleasure of staying with Margie and Michael, and even just meeting them for sort of 35 seconds, I was so buoyed and inspired and delighted by this energy of pure goodness and innovation and hope that they exude, that it re-energized me. And now hearing all of you and hearing about the work that you're all doing makes me feel that we are indeed not alone, and that we are part of, as Michael said this morning, many drops in a very big bucket, which hopefully will replenish and restore the earth and the Constitution. So thank you for restoring my energy. I'm going to talk today. I'm a pacer. Can you hear me if I just walk around like this? No. Yes, no. No. Okay. I'll pace minimally. I'm going to talk to you today just from my heart about a very serious situation we're in, and it's going to be a challenging journey. And I know you just went on a challenging journey hearing about threats to the planet, but you're tough and brave. And I promise you that I'm going to bring you out sort of in sunlight. I wrote this book, The End of America, because of an older friend and a younger friend. I have this older family friend who's the daughter of Holocaust survivors, and she and I would talk about news events. And she kept saying to me, they did this in Germany, they did this in Germany. And I thought this was crazy talk. I thought this was so extreme, and I wanted to ignore it. But she kept saying they did it in Germany, and she made me sort of sit down finally, and she put some histories in front of me, and she said, read. And I started to read. And sure enough, she wasn't talking about National Socialist outcomes, the later years, 38, 39. She was talking about the early years, 1930, 31, 32. Germany in the early 30s had movie stars and human rights organizations, gay rights organizations, sex education institutes, Bauhaus architecture, Paris fashion, page 6 type celebrity gossip. Didn't look that different. And so she was talking about these systemic assaults on civil society and on the Constitution of the early years. So I sat and read about Italy in the 20s, Germany in the 30s, as I mentioned, Russia in the 30s, East Germany in the 50s, Czechoslovakia in the 60s, and Chile's coup, Pinochet's coup in Chile in 1973, China's crackdown on democracy activists in the 80s. And what became clear to me was that every would-be dictator does the same 10 things, whether they're on the left or on the right. It's a blueprint to close down an open society or crush a democracy movement. And what was so clear is that basically Mussolini was the innovator. He figured it out. Hitler studied Mussolini. Stalin studied Hitler. Hitler studied Stalin. These guys learned from each other. The great dictators learned from each other. And then in the later part of the 20th century, petty dictators implement the blueprint. We, the United States, teaches would-be Latin American dictators the blueprint at the School for the Americas. There's a blueprint. And now that I know the blueprint, I wrote this book when Thailand had a coup, and I'm like, they're ticking the steps off. Boom, 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 boom. And 3 weeks ago, Myanmar had a crackdown. And I know the blueprint. So day one, the monks are marching. I knew that in 48 hours they'd be shooting the monks, and in 36 hours they'd be closing down telecommunications. The blueprint is predictive. And what became horrifically clear to me from my reading is that each of these 10 steps is underway in the United States right now. Another person I wrote this book for, the subtitle is Letter of Warning to a Young Patriot. And there is a real young patriot. Chris Lee, his Vietnamese name is Vu. He's a 28-year-old activist like many of you in the audience. Very idealistic, just the person you'd want to have leading the charge to restore our country when it's at such a time of peril. The trouble is that he, like me, like many Americans, we don't kind of spend a lot of time thinking about the Constitution and the Bill of Rights and how to protect democracy because we haven't had to. And also because, we've got this professional class of politicians and constitutional scholars, and they tell us, don't worry about it, we'll worry about it. Don't worry about freedom. So I wanted to write this book for him and this lovely young woman who's marrying someone I mentored because I realized that they urgently needed, yes, something from Crate and Barrel, but also a guide, a primer to what liberty is, how to recognize it, how to recognize what the founders wanted us to protect while it's threatened, as well as a guide to how, in the last century, open societies were closed down or crushed so they could recognize the warning signs in time. So I'm just going to tell you what would-be dictators always do when they want to close down an open society. Step number one, all would-be dictators on the left or on the right invoke a terrifying internal or external threat. And often it's a real one. Stalin, for instance, talked about sleeper cells. Who's heard that term in the last 6 years? Right. Now, we didn't hear that term in the Clinton years. I'm such a mom, I feel like whoever's coughing, could someone please give them a cough drop or some chicken soup? Or, Stalin told this terrifying narrative of sleeper cells who were capitalist agents, us, who were dressing up like good Soviet citizens and hiding among good Soviet citizens for years, when at a signal they would rise up and create terrorist mayhem in Russia. So this was a complete imaginary threat. Didn't exist, but it scared Russians. Pinochet, in contrast, talked about a real threat. He worried Chileans about armed insurgents. There were armed insurgents who he said were going to rise up, and in what he called Plan Z, and he showed these fake documents on television. Now, would-be despots often use fake documents, and who can name the fake documents that the White House used to drive us into a war with people who were not a threat to us? The yellow cake documents, exactly. Fake documents, the State Department was like, fake, 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 bogus. They're like, whatever, right? That purported to show that Iraq was buying yellow cake uranium in Niger so that we had to go to war so that, as Condoleezza Rice said, the smoking gun won't be a mushroom cloud. Scary. Right? Fake documents, would-be despots use them all the time. So Plan Z purported to show that these Chilean armed insurgents were going to again rise up at a signal and create terrorist mayhem, blow up infrastructure, completely hyped threat. The second thing a would-be despot always does, step two, is to create a prison system outside the rule of law where torture takes place. and they create a military tribunal system that strips prisoners of due process. Now, I'm kind of in shock this morning because I'm reading the coverage of Mukasey's nomination, and I am horrified knowing the blueprint and knowing history because Mukasey is defending torture. And he's saying the president is above the rule of law. The president is above the Constitution, which is exactly what leads to historical horrors, you don't even want to imagine. But why is the torture issue? Why is the fact that this administration is moving heaven and earth? Torture doesn't work. Okay, it doesn't work to get good intelligence. Everyone in the intelligence community knows this, says it. My book is full of examples of people who were tortured in the Gulag because a lot of these practices they're using right now come from Stalin's Gulag, the heat and cold, the sleep deprivation, standing positions. People who were taken to Stalin's Gulag, when they were subjected to 3 days of what Rumsfeld dismissed as standing positions, he said, whatever, I stand all the time, I stand for hours. They said after 3 days of this, we would have signed anything. So why does it matter that this administration is working so hard to legalize torture and to indemnify its torturers and to create a system where torture takes place? Here's why it matters. A lot of good people know about the prisoner abuse in Guantanamo and Iraqi-held prisons, and they're like, whatever. It's not my issue, as my brother said before he read my book. Here's why we should worry apart from the morality of it. You cannot name a society, or I invite you to, I was issuing this as a $50,000 challenge, and I'm going to move it up to a $100,000 challenge. Not that I have that handy, but no one's claiming the prize. So it's pretty confident. I invite you to name a society that created a secret prison system where torture takes place that did not sooner or later turn the abuse against its own citizens. Now, what you see in what I call a fascist shift, and I use that term very conservatively, there are a lot of definitions of fascism, and the one I use is a dictionary definition about when the state starts to use terror against the individual to oppose democracy. In a fascist shift, what you see is that the state will start by torturing people that ordinary citizens perceive as being marginal, at the margins of society. This is what happened in Germany. In 1930, 31, 32, torture was still technically illegal, and the National Socialists weren't even in power as a majority party. But the SA, these paramilitary thugs, just started to drag people seen as marginal off to these makeshift torture cellars and abuse them. And this was well known. German citizens knew about it. They thought it was funny. It was okay with them because it was these troublemakers over here. There were cartoons about it in the press. And when I read this, I think about shows like 24. We are becoming so acculturated to this. It's like, whatever, torture, whatever. They're brown people on an island. They're Muslim, whatever. We don't identify. In Germany, whatever. They're anarchists, they're communists, they're gypsies, they're homosexuals, they're Jews, whatever. But sure enough, once this became established, the abuse began to reach, there's always a blurring of the line, and the abuse began to reach to the usual suspects. It's always the same group at the heart of civil society. I'm sorry to say us. Hello. This is why it's very brave of you to be here and listen to this, in addition to the bad news about the bees, but we can change all of that. Sooner or later, the abuse is directed at journalists, editors, activists, labor leaders, opposition leaders, and outspoken clergy. So the blueprint is so predictive. They start with the brown people, they go to the white people. They start with the marginal, they go to the center. That I could have told you, I knew after the Military Commissions Act of 2006 was passed, which legalized torture, that the first prisoners that were going to be tried by the military commission system would be white and English-speaking. And sure enough, 8 months later, David Hicks, a white English-speaking prisoner, was among the first prisoners to be tried. The third thing a would-be dictator always does, and by the way, when you leave here, I'm so freaked out about this. Before I got on stage, I told the fabulous Margot Baldwin, my publisher, whom you should all buy Chelsea Green's books and read them. Yes. Cheers. I said, I can't go out there without calling Leahy's office. I can't do it. Like there was some horrible karma that was going to strike me if we didn't all immediately call Leahy's office. Because even as we speak, it's all hanging in the balance. You guys all have to call Leahy's office, and this is what you have to say. We are going to call you a traitor to the Constitution nationally in every single community, and we're going to go after your supporters. If you go online to Huffington Post, there's a list of hardball things you can say. You can't be nice anymore. Because Mukasey, whom they're about to confirm unless you guys stop it, is sanctioning torture. And he's sanctioning the fact that the president is above the rule of law. And if Congress lets that happen, is really I don't want to say the beginning of the end, but our job is going to be a lot harder and scarier. All right. The third thing a would-be dictator always does is create a paramilitary force that's not answerable to the people's representatives. Any suggestions? Thank you very much. So, Blackwater. So freaky, so scary. Most of you know that Blackwater just got in the news for cold-bloodedly mowing down 17 civilians in Iraq, and that they operate outside the rule of law in Iraq by design. Paul Bremer's Order 17 indemnifies them. And by the way, when you look at National Socialist legislation, they were very focused, as this administration is, on indemnifying the paramilitary from prosecution for war crimes. Well, what most of us don't know is that Blackwater, which has close ties to the White House and to Halliburton, and just got a $1 billion contract to deploy closer to home, is already in the United States. They were among the first boots on the ground in New Orleans in the wake of Hurricane Katrina, and Jeremy Scahill reported that contractors were shooting at civilians. And their business model calls for expansion in the United States in the event of a natural disaster or a quote-unquote public emergency. And again, in history, you show that a tipping point is when the state declares a public emergency and sends in the military forces, or the paramilitary, And as of the 2007 Defense Authorization Act, now the president, on his say-so alone, has new powers to declare a public emergency and let Congress know about it later. Not only that, the president has new powers to federalize the National Guard so that he can now take the National Guard, which is supposed to be answerable to our representatives, from Alabama and have them enforce martial law or a curfew on us here in Massachusetts and over the objections of the governors of Alabama and Massachusetts. Now, why is all of this such a horrific violation of what our founders intended? I mean, this is really bad. They're not teaching civics anymore. And I had a good education, and I had to go back and read, sometimes for the first time, like what were they up to when they were drafting the Bill of Rights? What did they actually say? What did they mean? What is the Bill of Rights? It's kind of hard to understand, the Constitution, the Bill of Rights. It's very 18th century, And this is bad. We need to create a user's guide to the Constitution. We're working on it. But like Constitution 1.0. But here's why this is such a nightmare. The founders, we walk around in this bubble of confidence about democracy. I mean, I hope I'm puncturing our bubble of confidence. We need to sort of not have it right now, but we tend to. Our friends and neighbors do. Democracy will protect us. It's America. The pendulum will swing. We'll vote the bums out. And we don't have to lift a finger to do it. But the founders would have been horrified by this because they drafted the Constitution, the Bill of Rights. Can we open some windows or doors or get some fresh air? I see people it's getting very stuffy in here. Tech gods, wherever you are. Thank you. Because they categorically knew that an American despot could arise in America to oppress Americans. And that's why they set up this system of checks and balances as they did. And they also totally knew that it was human nature to abuse power if power was unchecked. Whoever you are, President Hillary with these powers would be just as scary as President Giuliani. And so why is the paramilitary force so bad? I mean, first of all, you look at Italy, again, Mussolini, the great innovator. Italy was a constitutional parliamentary democracy, again, a fragile one, but it was, hanging in there. And he sent the paramilitary black shirts, the Arditi, to beat up and intimidate Italians. And by the way, you see so many parallels in my book between scenes, language, sound bites of those times and now. The Arditi would force people to drink emetics, and Hitler thought this was cool, so he had the SA force people to drink castor oil, and then you saw these scenes at the airport where TSA agents were forcing people to drink human breast milk and baby formula. Remember, then they abandoned it, because I guess it wasn't that important after all. But this is a scene you hadn't seen before in America, right? People burning CDs, Dixie Chick CDs. Where did we see that before? Goebbels had students burn spontaneously piles of books in 1933. The homeland, this, homeland security. It used to be called domestic security. Well, in 1931, the National Socialists introduced Heimat, homeland. Hitler and Mussolini realized if you send paramilitary to menace people counting the vote. It worked in Milan, they got intimidated. It worked in Austria, they got intimidated. Gee, here are Republican staffers identically dressed in chinos and white shirts, menacing and shouting at people counting the vote in Florida. That's a scene you didn't see in America before. I invite you to look at the plane descending through the clouds with the leader in the brown military suit, getting out of the plane, greeted by his uniformed supporters, and inviting them to help him accomplish his mission in Leni Riefenstahl's Triumph of the Will with, what am I about to describe? Mission accomplished, exactly. So this is bad, the paramilitary force. And the founders, why do we have the Second Amendment? Why do we have the Fourth Amendment? The Second Amendment says you can't have a standing army that is not answerable to the people. They had come out of a situation where King George's men were intimidating colonists, breaking into their homes, going through their stuff, molesting women, frightening children. That's why they said you cannot have an army that is not answerable to the people. And why do we have proscriptions against cruel and unusual punishment in our Constitution? They or their fathers and mothers had fled places where, in England, Tom Paine was going to be hanged for sedition for writing the rights of man, and Quakers fled to Philadelphia because they were being tortured by the state for their religious beliefs. So they knew about state torture. They knew about a standing army. Why do we have the Fourth Amendment? Because King George's men, mercenaries, were breaking into their homes, as I mentioned, taking their stuff. The state broke into Brandon Mayfield's home, an innocent yuppie lawyer in Portland, went through his kids' stuff, his family stuff, took away his computer. Imagine going home to find your home burglarized without a warrant. That's why blanket warrants are necessary. That's why this FISA fight. Why do we need blanket warrants? Because the founders knew how dangerous it is when your home isn't safe. So the paramilitary force is step number 3. And I'll just tell you step number 4, and then I'll skip the rest of the 10 steps. I'll get to the end and tell you what we can do. Step number 4 is to create a surveillance apparatus aimed at ordinary citizens. Now, those of you who know about East Germany know how powerful the perception was among ordinary citizens that the Stasi knew all about them. And when the wall came down, people were astonished to discover that only 10% of citizens actually had Stasi secret police files. Everyone else just thought they had a file. That's enough. You just need to let people know they're being watched to inhibit dissent. And readers of the Washington Post know that the level of surveillance in the United States has gotten so high that when you get on a plane, they know what you're reading, who your seatmate is, who you're going to visit when you get off the plane, and what their phone number is. So this is bad for liberty. And why, what's driving this? Many of you might be asking, well, what's the driver here? Because America isn't driven by ideology the way that Italy and Germany were. America is usually driven by profit. And that's exactly one of the drivers here. The Berlin Wall fell in 1989. So we lost a global enemy. And if you're the third of the market share of the economy that is the defense industry, you're looking at guaranteed declining profits, guaranteed upset shareholders, unless you do what? Create an enemy. Exactly. Ideally, a global enemy and a global war. Other countries like England have said there is no global war on terror. It's a fantasy. Gordon Brown has said terror is a crime, not a cause. But the defense industry has shifted from Cold War type weapons systems to surveillance and security technologies. And they have lobbyists, and the lobbyists work closely with Homeland Security, writing policies. There are billions to be made in turning the United States essentially into a police state. And hyping or guaranteeing that we will have an open-ended global war on terror. If terrorists put down their arms tomorrow, they would be looking at radically declining market share. And you guarantee your market share by making sure that the people who are in need of surveillance are a domestic enemy, meaning us. In case you doubt this, a colleague of mine who's on the Trilateral Commission calls this the security industrial complex. And in case you doubt this, take a look at some news stories on the cover of the New York Times. Wall Street is investing massively in surveillance technologies in China because there are billions to be made by an enormous police state. Surveillance technologies in an enormous police state. So there is every commercial incentive to driving, maintaining, hyping, sustaining this unnecessary level of fear and this fake war on terror. I'm not saying terrorism isn't an issue. I'm saying that we could be fighting it the way Spain and England and Israel are fighting it without terrorizing and subjugating their own citizens. And I look at Spain and how they reacted to their own assault by the same bad guys that we're fighting by upholding the rule of law and trying the accused in civil court and putting the transcripts transparently on the internet. Very different approach to the same bad guys. So I'm just going to skip ahead. The other steps are things like arbitrary detention and release, restrict the press. We're seeing more and more journalists being prosecuted, threats to prosecute journalists under the Espionage Act. Bill Keller, editor of the New York Times, there was a drumbeat of sound bites when he ran the FISA, the surveillance stories, that he should be charged with treason or charged under the Espionage Act. And Melanie Morgan, a right-wing talk show host, said that if he got convicted, he should be executed. Well, if you know history, this is pretty chilling, because in 1937, the publisher of Izvestia, which is sort of the Russian New York Times, was charged with treason and was, in fact, executed. So then you skip ahead to the last stage, which is to subvert the rule of law and make it easier to declare martial law. And at the end of America, there's this playing out of what ifs that are very plausible based on the historical record of scenarios that could destabilize the country running up to the election. Because in a closing society, the months before a national election are very unstable. So I need to get to what we're going to do before we all kill ourselves, right? Are you guys okay out there? This is very, very dark, but it's better. I really admire Americans because I keep apologizing for this message, and they're like, just tell us. We can handle it. Let's move to Canada. If it were only that simple, Medea Benjamin got turned back of Code Pink when she tried to cross the border into Canada. So what do we do? And by the way, why am I so personally driven by this? Partly it's my own experience. For about a year and a half, every time I got on a plane, I would be taken aside for extra searching, a quadruple S security mark on my boarding pass. And I'm, short Jewish girl from New York. What terrorist profile do I fit? What cadre of Jewish feminists is rampaging around the globe, frightening people? Well, many, I'm sure, but not violently. And, I kept asking, why? And finally, a nice TSA agent said, you're on the list. And I'm like, the list? I'm on the list? And I reported it out, and sure enough, Richard Murphy, a top constitutional scholar from Princeton who had just given a talk on Bush's assault on the Constitution, is on the list. David Altoon, highly decorated war hero, flew many missions for the United States, criticized the war. He's on the list. His family's on the list. Jessica Rakoff, senior at the Justice Department, who told her colleagues don't torture John Walker Lind, found her emails expunged, a criminal indictment against her. She was referred to the Bar Association, and she is on the list. Staffers from the ACLU are on the list. 2 nice little old middle-aged anti-war activists from San Francisco are on the list, and so on. And it gets scarier to be on the list. In a fascist shift, you don't want to be on a list because it starts with minor harassment, but then it ratchets up. And there's some very disturbing developments with the list. I don't want to go into some of them now, but what is most disturbing is that the administration of the list is about to go from the airlines to the TSA itself. And there's a new initiative that you have to ask for permission from the United States government to fly out of the country, or maybe even to fly domestically. I didn't look at it that carefully, which is basically what happens in a closed society. Borders close. So it's not good. It's very, very, very bad. What do we do? What do we do? What we need right now, and it's like right now, it's like when you leave this hall, it's like get on your cell phones now, start organizing now. We don't have a minute to waste. Well, first of all, it's really important to know the blueprint, so please read the book and distribute it. I mean, it's important to know and recognize what's happening. But second, we need a democracy movement aimed at restoring the rule of law and the Constitution right now. So I co-founded an organization called the American Freedom Campaign, and the address is in the back of the book, AmericanFreedomCampaign.org, which is a democracy movement where we're asking millions of Americans to rise up right now and confront these abuses and these abusers and save the country and save liberty now. We cannot wait it out. There is no time. We have 5 million members in partner organizations now. We've been running about 2.5, 3 months. So that's good, but we need 20 million. So you reach out to all of your partner organizations, all your friends and family, and sign up. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Yes, good. Hope. Hope. Thank you. We put a pledge to all the candidates to restore the Constitution. We have now all the Democratic candidates. Obama and Hillary were the last holdouts, but we got them, and we got Hillary to move on torture, and now we're going to the Republicans. But even better, we have a 10-point agenda, and this is big news. If we pass these laws, these 10 laws, it will stabilize democracy. It's things like restore habeas corpus, protect journalists from prosecution under the Espionage Act, forbid warrantless wiretapping. Oh, I left out the big one. The president has the power to call you or me an enemy combatant because he says so. Innocent U.S. citizens, didn't do anything, doesn't matter. Take us out of this hall and put us in a Navy cell 10 by 12 feet wide and keep us there for 3 years in solitary confinement. Tomorrow, today, if he wants to. So we have to change that, okay? So the amazing thing from this groundswell, just the beginning, but we can push it further, from the pressure of us and other organizations and citizens speaking up, Congress has finally taken on board the fact that Ron Paul yesterday introduced our sister organization, the AFA's version of the same 10 laws. They're almost identical. So he's introduced it into Congress, right? So you need to bombard Congress. Go to the Huffington Post. I've written about this yesterday. You can see exactly what to do. You need to call Congress, call Nancy Pelosi, call your representatives, especially if you're Republican or no Republicans. Make them make their calls to say you have to pass this or I will, I have a series of threats, not violent threats, but sort of call you a traitor to the Constitution type threats. You've really got to play hardball with this one. If we get them to pass it, we will save democracy enough to give us a breath to do the long-term confrontation. And I just want to say 2 more things. It's very, very clear. I never thought I'd say this at the beginning of my journey. I thought impeachment was unnecessary, destabilizing, risk being too partisan. But history shows these people, there are people in the military saying these people are out of control. This is no longer democracy. And not only is it no longer democracy, they are criminals at the helm, violent criminals, posing a threat to every single one of us. So where should violent criminals be when they try to seize a state, especially the most powerful state in the world? They need to be behind bars. So, again, rigorously, not partisan, not retributive vengeance, but based purely on the rule of law and the Constitution. How does our system correct itself when there's really a coup of this severity? I sat down with Michael Ratner of the Center for Constitutional Rights, and he walked me through the 3 ways that you impeach, prosecute, and convict, right? And I will post this on the internet, ideally by tomorrow, once I can catch my breath. But we need to demand that Congress hold hearings into the crimes, tell Nancy Pelosi she's not allowed to take impeachment off the table. Hello, it's America. Nancy Pelosi doesn't decide, the people decide. And we need to have congressional hearings into the crimes committed with an eye toward a lawful constitutional prosecution for the crimes that these people have committed. And we don't have a moment to waste. So that is what I call for. We can do it, but we need you. The good news I want to end on is that history also shows that bullies are cowards, and that when millions of citizens, especially with the vestiges of democracy intact, rise up to confront them in the millions, but it takes the millions, then there is no force on earth that can stop them. So please go out, fight this fight, and save the country. We can do it. Thank you very, very, very much. Thank you.